Good afternoon and welcome back to The Edge, the podcast where we go beyond the textbooks and into the real conversations about what leadership really looks like. In this episode, we're diving into something often assumed but rarely explored: entrepreneurship as a leadership quality. Is it essential? Is every great leader also a natural entrepreneur? Or can you lead brilliantly without ever having that particular spark? We're not just talking about starting businesses. We will be talking about mindset, the ability to take risk, to think creatively under pressure, to build something new when others might settle. We are asking, what role does entrepreneurial thinking play in leading teams, building cultures, and shaping futures? And what happens when it's missing?
Let's just jump right in. So, first question. What does entrepreneurship mean to you? Does it mean starting a business, or is it more of a mindset?
Oh, look, it's one of the great long debated questions, isn't it? An entrepreneur is all about setting up a business to make profit and taking risks to make profit, but it's deeper than that because entrepreneurs always have a commitment and a vision to something they see that others don't see, which is always what makes them set apart. I think that actually in the corporate world is actually quite a dangerous trait to have around, and actually entrepreneurs with the very nature of them are unique characters, good or bad. I think entrepreneurs often come out of a bad experience. Some are natural entrepreneurs, but some are reactions to being made redundant, seeing something, having a bad experience when they see something that others don't see, and actually then naturally responding to that. So a lot of entrepreneurs you'll find come out when they don't feel they can work for anyone else because they don't think the people see what they see, so they end up doing it themselves. Now, that's a great trait in some ways that people see and have that vision, but actually often within corporate business, it doesn't work. So it's how you find the balance between the two.
I think that was kind of what I was going to get to after you mentioned risk and vision. If you're thinking about like a seesaw, which one's more important then? Would you say one's more important than the other, or are they both equally?
I think risk is tiring. I think entrepreneurs often talk about people taking risk, and it's very easy to do that. But actually, most people don't want risk; they want security. So, and that's why I think entrepreneurs sometimes in corporate doesn't really work, because actually most people in corporate don't want risk; they want security. So I think it's vision. I think one of the dangers nowadays is vision seems to become less and less of a trait for whatever reason. And I think it's because the world gets more complicated now, and it's harder to see clear roads forward and opportunity because there's so much noise and so much goes on around people. I think sometimes we make it very hard for entrepreneurs. I also think it's got harder and harder. The cost of entry now to be entrepreneurs is probably triple what it used to be. So that risk factor then goes up. I think it's hard, and there are more barriers to entrepreneurs working with larger companies now. And actually, one of the things we've often talked about is there's a greater need for larger companies to work with smaller companies to build that marriage, that relationship, because actually both need one another. The large companies need the innovation, the smaller companies need the big companies to be their clients. So how you can build that relationship, I think it's getting harder, but I think it's more vital than ever.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
So, sort of linking back into what you said before, do you think you can teach entrepreneurial thinking, or is it more so something that's innate? And if it can be taught, how can we all be more entrepreneurial to kind of help create that vision and that marriage?
I don't think you can teach people to be entrepreneurs or innovative. I think and actually the whole bit, be innovative, I find comes a bit of a cliche because most people aren't innovative at all. So asking people to be something they can't be, I think is often counterproductive. And actually entrepreneurs, as I mentioned, is often a reaction to a circumstance. So it's not something you can be taught, it's something how you respond to a scenario. So you may see an opportunity in a particular moment in time. You may be reacting to being made redundant. You may be reacting to being unhappy in work, but you reacting. Entrepreneurs are often fascinating characters. Look, they are often geniuses, often a little bit mad, often a little bit on the spectrum. But actually, that's what makes them brilliant and brilliant company as well. that isn't the skill set you always want. Because one of the great things corporates often say, we'd like an entrepreneur around the board table. They hate it when they have it, because the entrepreneur is so off the wall the whole time and shaking things up, and he sees a different picture to what a corporate will see, which is all often about having security and process and everything defined in the right way. The two aren't natural bed companions, although both actually sit alongside each other, if that makes sense. Because actually the entrepreneur will hold the corporate to account by pushing the boundaries that the corporate needs to respond to. So the entrepreneur will do things that a corporate would never do in a million years, which makes the person respond. So it is a little bit like a secret conversation that goes on. You need the different characters around the same discussion, but they all are very, very different personalities or characters, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I was about to say, I mean, I think when you want to think about a boardroom, you want everyone to be complementing each other and to offer different things. So you'd think there is a real place for someone to have that innovative. You don't necessarily like that way of thinking, the word innovative, but I'm just saying.
It's not being innovative. It's a bit like anything, isn't it? It's just not a natural trait nowadays for many people. So I think I think it's important to be innovative. I think it's always important to be progressive. I think where the entrepreneur differs as a character is they are so committed to what they think. When you talk to entrepreneurs, they believe they're right. Regardless of any fact, they believe they're right, and they believe they have the answer and the solution and the vision and the roadmap on the way forward. And the problem about that's non-compromising. So entrepreneurs are used to taking risk. Say again?
Is that what makes them successful, though?
Yeah,
The fact that they don't stop at anything.
So, but it makes them bad team members because they're right. And it's not that they haven't got good hearts or nice people, all that type of stuff. They're often fantastic characters, but they are not. They're non-compromising and prepared to take risk and put their whole selves on the line. Is very different to what you find in a team atmosphere.
Yeah, I can understand that.
And that's why the two they can't be bedfellows, but they can sit adjoined.
So would you say that there's many entrepreneurial leaders around in the industry, or would you say it's not? They're kind of more the traditional business management.
Yeah, no, I think it's harder now for entrepreneurs to set up, but there's as many entrepreneurs today around as there's ever been. I think sometimes you see people trying to be entrepreneurs but not entrepreneurs, but that's always been the case. And I think a lot of people don't understand the risk involved. I think it always sounds glamorous to have your own business and do your own business. I don't think people always understand what's involved in it. I always remember years ago, I used to take budding entrepreneurs to meet one person who always told them it's the hardest decision, worst decision ever made. And although they made millions out of it, the pain they went through just wasn't worth the sacrifice. And if they did it again, they wouldn't do it. And you do it because it actually tests the person whether he wants to carry on doing it, because once you hear that. And look, being an entrepreneur certainly will test every fibre of someone's character and expose every weakness. And actually, that's what entrepreneurs will stand there and be exposed, if you like, but still carry on the next day, regardless, and pick themselves up. Well, most people don't want that and don't want to expose themselves to that and want a different type of mindset and approach to life.
I think that's what it comes back to, is the mindset, isn't it? You know, an entrepreneurial mindset is very different to probably how you would define the typical leader mindset. There are differences. There's similarities, but there's probably some inherent differences.
Well, I think leadership's changed. I think that's the key piece. Leadership in the old days maybe was more about the leader being accessible, charging over the hill, standing on a stump, giving proclamations. It's not anymore. Leadership today is about creating frameworks that create safe spaces for talent to grow and aspire and be the best they can be, and to create a brand that has real values. And that's not about a personality. That's about a brand and about depth to the process or the proposition that's offered. So leadership today is anything but entrepreneurial, because it's not meant to be entrepreneurial. It's meant to be about people and brand and stakeholder value. So it's putting others first. So leadership today is about putting others first. Well, entrepreneur, it's not that they're not trying to put others first. They just have their own vision they're going to follow regardless. So they are two very different traits. And as I said, you need both, but they both bring a different reaction to the marketplace.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, would you say that entrepreneurship is more about breaking rules or knowing which rules matter the most?
Well, yeah, you can. It depends. It depends which rules, doesn't it? I mean, you've got to play within the rules, like financial irregularities and all that type of stuff. You don't want those broken. It's about thinking differently. So, I mean, one of the greatest hotel entrepreneurs, is a guy called Ken McCulloch, who is the founder of Malmaison, who just viewed hotels through different eyes. So for him, he was always different. He always looked at it through the eyes of the customer, the client. Most people don't. Most hoteliers, I'm sure they tell me otherwise, but most of them don't look at the eyes of the customer journey. They look at the eyes of the hotel. They look at the hotel as a business proposition rather through the eyes of the customer and the customer journey. So for Ken, he always saw it as design and comfort and how the person would feel and how to make people feel comfortable away from home. So the way he approached it was very different, and basically how you tell a story through a building. Most hotels don't do that. But it's thinking differently about the customer journey is often what makes entrepreneurs slightly different.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not, entrepreneurs are driven to make money, of course, and wealth and all those things, but that's not the heart of them. Actually, what the heart of them is, they see something different that others don't do, and it defines them. Is that it is about the defining themselves to be that person stands alone and be different than anything else.
Yeah.
And it's one of those really interesting ones, because entrepreneurs often, they got this incredible courage to stand alone, take every humiliation possible, every punch possible, but actually often are quite thin-skinned. And actually, often when you're talking to entrepreneurs, if you have a conversation about any criticism of them, they don't react well to it. They're often very thin-skinned and are quite emotional characters. But that's also part of the complexity of that kind of character, which is the reason why they're so different. And you can't manufacture them, and you can't train them. They are just different in how they
So
are. That makes sense.
actually, can you expand on what kind of qualities you think make a successful entrepreneur? If you could draw it out, if you like, what would you say are the most kind of important qualities?
I think you look, wherever, if you're going to do an entrepreneurial business, it's got to be different, hasn't it? It can't be just more of the same. So it's got to be something that's distinctly different. So what is it that's distinctly different? So you've got to put your vision right out there. I think that's number one. Entrepreneurs, by the very nature of them, are resilient characters because they believe 100% and committed. And it must be quite similar to a sports person. You can't do sport, surely, if you're not 100% committed. You can't do this halfway house, and it must be the same when you're competing.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say it before, but it sounded incredibly, I don't mean it in a negative manner, but I would say it's very similar to athletes. Like when you meet a lot of athletes, they're so focused, it comes across sometimes very selfish because it's about them and about their journey and that nothing will get in their way. And basically, they'll get anybody out of the way who's in their way, if you see what I mean.
Well, funnily enough, we were talking about Daley Thompson, weren't we, the other day, and that BBC documentary on him. And the
Yeah.
BBC documentary did highlight actually a lot of what an entrepreneur is, because he was the most brilliant athlete, and yet he was a person who went around winding everybody up. Because actually that's what he needed to do to make himself brilliant at what he did.
And it's the same thing as when you're going into a competition. It's amazing to sit back and watch, say, a pool of athletes. Everybody acts differently. You've got the real nervous ones who are chatting the ears off everybody and anybody because they've just got, they're burning almost nervous energy. And then you've got some who go really into themselves because they're like, whether that's a negative, you could argue some people do it in a positive way, a negative way. And then you've got others who just try and act normal and just talk to people and not too focused in that moment. And it's kind of a similar thing. You have to figure out the way to behave that helps you to perform better. It's probably the same with Daley Thompson. He did well by winding people up.
Absolutely. And it's the same in business.
Yeah.
But he was brilliant. It's actually the same. Entrepreneurs almost are, they do walk that different line to others.
Mhm.
Does that make it wrong or does it make it right? It's just different. It is interesting.
The world would be a very boring place if we all did the same thing and saw it the same way.
Mm-hmm.
Well, absolutely. But I do think they sit separately. So it's just like you couldn't take Daley Thompson and put him around a collaborative table.
No.
There's a lovely moment in that documentary. Is when he's talking to Seb Coe, who's his best friend in the team, and he says to Seb Coe, asks him, "Do you actually, when they both retain their gold medals at the '84 Olympics, way before your time, Katie, I apologise."
That's okay.
Before he said, he asked, "Did you actually want me to retain my title?" And Seb Coe said, "Yeah, of course I did. You're my friend." To which he replied, "Well, I didn't want you to." To which Seb Coe said, "F off." But that's his mindset. His mindset that I wanted to be the only person who retained their gold medal and stand out in history. That's what I want. And he's been so honest to his friend, but no one would normally say that to another person. Is that
No.
good? Is that bad? Just, huh?
There's normally a filter that stops stuff like that getting through.
Absolutely. You may think it, but yeah, everyone else has a filter. And I think that's absolutely right. He obviously has no filter, but actually often entrepreneurs have no filter. And often you sit with an entrepreneur and they will often be quite, again, when you listen to an entrepreneur, often when you sit with them, people say they're egocentric. Often they are because they're talking about themselves and they talk about their vision. But that's a result of often they've had to stand alone. And because they've had to stand alone, they have to rely on their inner selves to survive, which means they end up talking about themselves. It's not that they're egocentric, which is what people call them. It's too simplistic. It's actually the fact that they are so inwardly reliant and self-sufficient on themselves. It's the only way they survive, that they end up talking about that subject.
When you think about an investor, we often always say how investors buy into the entrepreneur, don't they? Is that because they see them as this authentic personality that they warm to necessarily, or is it because they see them as such a driven success story that they think, you know what, we should back this woman, this man?
It's a mixture of everything. The investor likes to see the investors coming at it, they want to see a proposition that is unique and competitive in the marketplace. It's less about the entrepreneur, actually. They want to see a proposition that they believe will make money. So any investor comes with three questions. How much have I got to invest? When do I get it back? And what's my profit? That's the only three things that actually they're looking at when they come to talk. What they will be determined by is actually, do I like this person and do I want to support them? And it comes down to about the person every single time. I always remember a classic example of once having this entrepreneur pitch to three different investors, and each one came out saying no. And the third one came out, why? Because actually they had this amazing document, amazing pitch. I think they had 62 pages of figures, all analysed down in every possible way you could ever do. And the person just turned around and said, because I just don't like them. And there's nothing you can do to bridge that. The counter argument, I've sat in an event where a brilliant entrepreneur presented no figures whatsoever, but had everyone laughing, and they got 3 offers of investment. God. So it comes down to, do I like this person? Do I back them, and do I support them? It is quite a personal thing. And again, it goes back to that piece where the entrepreneur ends up being that inner self, because everything is about judging them. And actually that gets tiring, because you've been judged all the time. You are hero and villain so often, it gets a bit boring. Because actually often it's about both every day of the week, both personally and professionally. So you can see why the entrepreneur ends up becoming their own silo, because that's the only way they can survive and cope.
That sort of human aspect that you mentioned, how it often comes down to the connection part and whether or not the investors like the actual person. I think that is really interesting. And then sort of with that in mind, how can you maintain the entrepreneurial spirit as the business grows? How can you maintain that sort of likable human quality within the vision?
No, it's a great question, Katie. There's a number of points. Often entrepreneurs sell for obvious reasons. And then often the entrepreneurial business will decline once it's sold because people don't have that same vision and passion for the business the entrepreneur did. So unless you have that same thing, it's not something you can replicate, and that's always a danger. So it becomes a brand, it becomes a process and a deal. And it doesn't mean it can't be successful, it just changes naturally. And the entrepreneur will go and do something else. There's always a debate, does the entrepreneur have a lifespan? Yeah, I think the argument today is most chief execs have a lifespan of a maximum of 5 years in post before they burn out and become tired. And I think probably the argument for entrepreneurs is about 8 years because their passion will carry them through. After that, they often lose the magic they had at the beginning. And actually, that is always a problem. Is often entrepreneurs you become something everyone loves, the passion everyone loves, the magic everyone loves, and then actually after a point it becomes something actually people don't like so much. It becomes controversial. It becomes more tainted, if you like, and it's actually very hard to keep maintaining it. It's actually the same as again most teams. Most people would say they can build 2 to 3 teams in a career, and that's all. But the team will only ever stay together for about 18 months, 2 years max. So if you think of a whole career, if you're building teams, you can only have a team for 6 years, proper team for 6 years. Those magical moments, it's fantastic. But it means you're spending another 30, 35 years often building teams and going through the pain of them breaking up, not working, whatever. So it shows how hard it is, really hard to ever build teams, build that magic that entrepreneurs often have for a while, for a short glimpse of time, and then go on. It is a remarkably painful process that people never see. It's just how painful it is, I think.
Yeah. Could you ever be an entrepreneur, Chris? I feel like EP is entrepreneurial in itself, is
Well,
it not?
people always say that, but actually, I'd always argue we were manufactured. And what I mean by manufactured is it goes back to that piece. The reason why I set up Chess originally was because I didn't see anyone else I could work for. So actually, I always argue I was forced to do it almost by accident because and then you do it, and then actually, I don't think I was an entrepreneur. I think you become it out of circumstance again, actually, rather than anything else.
Yeah, it's almost as if you get this vision and you believe in it so much that the entrepreneurial, maybe all the qualities come out of being so focused on making that a success, rather than. So I was about to ask, as a young person today, could you go and ask yourself, do I have entrepreneurial qualities? And you might not, but you could be a fantastic entrepreneur if you have the right idea, I suppose.
I mean, funnily enough, I mean, it is without being too deep. Life is a journey, and it's a journey of discovery. It's not silly. I mean, it's the old Tony Blair thing. The better prime minister he became, the less popular he became. And and actually, often competence makes you less popular. Weirdly, and that's because partly you can't appeal to people in the same way. That broad church, you end up being more specific and more bespoke. And it's the same in most things in careers. As the more experienced you are, funnily enough, the less skilled you are at building new teams. If that makes any sense. It's all about balance, isn't it? It's a bit like the Obama effect in 2008. He ignited a whole nation. But that was a moment in time. Did he lose it by the end? It's always a great debate. Probably he halved his support. But he will still believe he was a great president. I mean, everyone can have that debate. But if he was, would that have led to what followed? So again, these are always the great debates. But what he had as a magic was being able to connect with people at an early date, which actually got lost over a period of time. And it's the same often in every walk of life, whether you're a leader or whether you're an entrepreneur or whether you're a politician, is when you're connecting. It's often when you're not that clever. And when the cleverer you get, the funny less connected you are.
Also, sometimes, though, the more successful you are, people almost want to see you fail. Do you think that's fair?
No, I don't. Actually, fairness, I don't. I think people always say that. That's one of the great catch lines. I don't, hand on heart, I very rarely ever had a conversation when I've seen people want someone to fail. But actually, funnily enough, it doesn't. I think the danger is you do end up failing more because you either take less risk or you don't do the bits that made you successful in the first place, or you become more cynical, or you become more weary, more tired, or 1,000 different things. And so you actually create your own failure. Funnily enough, the whole thing about critics, it doesn't actually matter what they say. I mean, this isn't the old cliche. It doesn't actually matter what anyone says. The market buys what they see. They don't buy what's said about the person. So they buy the proposition of what you're promising them. They don't buy. They may like you, they may be drawn to you, they like interacting with you, but what they'll pay money for is your proposition or your offer.
It's like the people are icing on top of it, aren't they?
Yeah.
Your personality.
So it's competence. People will buy competence at the end of the day. They're not going to buy anything but anything else. So people aren't stupid, and they're not going to listen to gossip or what people say, and they won't be influenced by whether someone's going to. People want people to fail. Actually, most people want people to succeed. Actually, they're not worried about that at all.
Something you mentioned before was that even though the entry level for entrepreneurs is now much higher than it used to be, and the access and the costs of it, but there are still so many entrepreneurs around. Why do you think that is, even though like the entry level has widened significantly?
Yeah, it has changed dramatically, Katie. Now, there is a bigger polarization now. The biggest polarization I've seen in my lifetime between the wealthy and the next levels down. So, and the wealthy are happy to invest in entrepreneurs and look to invest in entrepreneurs. So there's more money around than there was, but the cost is that much greater. So you can argue that because there is a greater wealth gap, and the rich are very rich or the wealthy are very wealthy, that's partly you need the entrepreneurs have to make business plans, stronger business plans than I've had to do, to get the wealth and get investment, which is the reason there'll always be people who want to invest. But there is a bigger gap. Now, what history always shows you is that gap actually then creates change for the positive, normally one way or the other, or creates change that actually moves things forward in a different way. It's fascinating, isn't it? It's one of the great conversations, but it's just different. So I think the average cost for an entrepreneur back in the 90s was probably 100 grand to set up. Now it's probably 250, 300 grand, really, to get a business into the right place. So it's a very different. So you won't get that from an individual. The 100 grand you may have got from an individual, you wouldn't get that for 300 grand. So it has to come from either a high net worth or institution or thing.
So it means you probably need more initial backing at the very start on somebody who likes your vision early days, whereas before you could just go off on your own and just, go chomping at the bit because you believe in yourself and then seek the investment.
Yeah, I think that. Yeah, look, I think the people have to work really hard to get investment, and actually, I really admire the entrepreneurs today, and that they work really hard, often for very little reward, to make their case and follow their dream. And actually, you have to admire the trait. You really do have to admire them. You may not always like them, but you have to admire them because they really put their body and soul on the line for it.
Absolutely. It's always kind of like it's not sort of a day job where you clock in and clock out. It's just a 24/7 sort of thing where you're always on, you're always an entrepreneur, you're always trying to like further it more and more, rather than being
Yeah.
now I'm at work, now I'm not at work. It's just constant.
Yeah. No, I think that's absolutely right. And it's no different for you, Katie. I mean, you're a writer, you're writing a novel. You must be thinking about that novel the whole time.
Absolutely, yeah. Like always.
Yeah. And that's your passion.
Always in there.
You would judge, and actually isn't the real point on this is how you define your success in life or failure in life. Because actually for you, you're going to define, I assume, your writing will define you in future times. And the same for Izzy. Izzy athletics will define her in her mind. Whether in everyone else's mind is irrelevant. And actually, funnily enough, and that's what I think as business, you end up getting defined by other people, interestingly. So it is really interesting where you get to.
And I think the other thing I always think about for entrepreneurs too is the challenge with the market. I mean, obviously that business is affected by the market as well, but when you're working tirelessly, probably like you say, all hours of the day, focus on getting investment, and you're probably doing 4 a.m. emails and probably barely gone to sleep and so driven, and yet
No, I like my sleep.
things
I
like
like my sleep.
So do I. That's why I'm thinking as I say that. Maybe not for me then. So, but you could see how frustrating it is if, say, I mean, stuff that going on in America, how that can affect things, and whether investors kind of tense up and are not wanting to invest during certain periods.
Yeah, look, I think this year has been very much like that. I mean, I think the investment in the UK has been harder this year. Sales for smaller businesses have been harder this year. I think there's a report came out today showing sales in smaller businesses actually declined during the first 6 months of this year. I think big has become beautiful because it's safe and solid. And it goes back to that same thing. So I think people are investing in secure, safe businesses. But entrepreneurs, and again, it goes back to the same thing. Entrepreneurs will always find a way. They'll always find a solution. So whatever you're throwing at them, they will find a solution to find a way forward, because that's the nature of the character that makes them that way.
Yeah. So what do you think is the most important question, say, if a young person who's aspiring to be an entrepreneur should ask themselves before starting out? Or a couple of questions. I'll make it plural because there might not just be just one.
Well, look, I will always argue you get driven to it. It's not something that you choose. It becomes a calling, funnily enough, because you can't work for anyone else, and you can only work for yourself. So I think it becomes that way. So I don't think it's about asking questions to yourself. I think it just happens. The question, at the end of the day, the question is, do you have enough belief to put up with what you will be mentally challenged with? So, and even then, you probably don't want to know in advance. You probably learn as you go. And actually, the reality is, as I said before, every weakness you have will get exposed, often publicly. So you've got to put up with that, learn from it, adapt. And it's about resilience. It's all about resilience. That's why it's like sport. It's very no different to writing. You've got to be resilient to what you get wrong, learn from it, pick yourself up, and go the next day. And you've got to be that type of character. If you're going to be, if you need someone else to show you the road, it isn't going to happen.
Yeah. Maybe also I can also imagine having a good support system around you is probably quite important. But I think that's in every sense of the word. I'm not just saying necessarily entrepreneur. Chris, why are you laughing? It's making me nervous.
Well, I think, funnily enough, there's always, funnily enough, entrepreneurs often have mixed personal lives.
Really?
Yeah, and for good reason, because they are uncompromising, that often it's very hard for their partner.
Yeah.
Incredibly hard for the partner. The entrepreneur is not the one who suffers, the partner is the one who suffers. And actually, it's a bit like an athlete, a great athlete. It's exactly the same, isn't it? The same on the Daley Thompson one. If you go back, and it's a great documentary. If you haven't watched it, watch it, because they split up from his first wife and children. Because actually, it is the wives who take, or the partners who take all the pain of your commitment, of your dream, of your ambition, of your aspiration. So having that support network, yeah, you're right. I mean, it's the old thing is that, behind every successful person, there's that person holding them up. But that person takes so much strain. Often it takes its own strain as well.
Yeah, I'm glad that you managed a serious answer after laughing to start with. I was concerned what was going to come next.
Right. As you know, often it gets very interesting at times, as you know.
Yeah, definitely.
Often you're
Yeah.
sitting there going, okay. Boring, right? It's not a boring story. It's just probably not what you'd hope at the beginning, not what the one you'd paint out.
I think that's very fair. Yeah. So, trying to think of a good finishing question for you, Chris. Any kind of advice you would give to somebody who's wanting to consider entrepreneurship?
Well, isn't it about time I turn the question around? Isn't it what we always try and do?
No, I think we're nearly running out of time.
So I suppose
Jeepers.
isn't the answer come from you two, isn't it? So Katie, do you have an option to not writing? And Izzy, do you have an option to not doing javelin?
I know
Katie?
I don't. It's something that I have to do, undoubtedly. I have to do it.
And if you didn't do it, what would you do?
Fall apart. Sorry.
I know you say that as a joke, but it does feel
Yeah.
like if I
Yeah.
can't do it for whatever reason, that I just can't picture myself, if that makes sense. Like it's just so interwoven to who.
Well, and it's exactly the same for the
Yeah.
entrepreneur. That's exactly the point. So you are entrepreneurial in just a very different type of way, Katie. You are an entrepreneur.
The vision, I suppose, and the
Well, I
whatever
think
sort of
writing a book,
field.
writing a novel, you need a vision, you need a story, and you need to somehow guide people through it. I think that is remarkably difficult and to be praised.
Definitely.
Now I've got past Izzy now to Kate. Izzy now. So I mean, you go training all the time.
Well, to be honest, I have to answer this differently because let's be honest, if I fast forward, let's say I'm 70, if I can still throw a javelin, I'm doing very well. It's just
If you can throw a javelin at 70, I'll be hugely impressed.
so will I. I think that would be probably going into the Guinness World Record
I
book.
was going to say.
Yeah.
No, I mean, there's plenty of people who do it as, veteran, but yeah, when you do it when you're younger, it kind of batters and bruises your body so badly that you will not be doing it past a certain age because it's just too.
But isn't there a point here, Izzy? As all, you're not really answering the question, are you?
I am.
You're
I'm
not.
saying
I
I
don't
will
think you
have
are.
to find another form. I'll have to find one at some point because I
Well,
won't
that's the
do
point.
it
The
forever.
point is you put career. You don't put it on hold. You're running it alongside your sporting career because you're driven that way.
Mhm.
So what happens at that moment where your body gives up on you?
I'll have to put it back together with sellotape. I'm joking. I'll be throwing, I don't know, all sorts of things are coming in my mind. Well, I
It's
think
always
that
actually it's one of the great. Yes, sir, after you. It's
I
one of
was
the
going
great
to
things
say,
often with sports players. You ask them, the professional sports players, you ask, how do you give up? How do you give it up? And they're always happy to give it up because their body doesn't hold up anymore.
I think the other thing as well is I wouldn't be surprised if how many people say that they're going to give it up and then go back again to then maybe try it for another year and they realize that the mind wants to do it, but the body isn't where it used to be. And I think when you've been throwing at a specific level and your body's not matched up to that level anymore, I mean, it's quite a tough pill to swallow anyway, to know that you just can't be where you used to be. So I guess that's probably naturally where you get pushed to go, I've got to, throw the towel in here. I've got to move on from this.
I think that. I mean, I love sport, but you get old as you get older, you get worse and worse. You have to walk away because you actually get embarrassed by yourself.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one because someone I know obviously used to throw the javelin, and I think somewhere along the lines of the career, the shoulders and the elbows get a little bit battered and bruised, and you go see a specialist, and they say you cannot do anything above head anymore. So that was what he was told, never, no more. It's just you're gonna need X, Y, and Z surgery. You're gonna have severe problems. So obviously he takes the advice and stops doing anything above head. And now he can't even put a jumper on. Okay. So that's where there's a fine line between almost you have to listen to certain things, but then you almost have once you've started, you can't stop completely because your body's so used to stuff that you've then got to go, okay, I've got to maintain it because otherwise it's almost like oiling the system. That's how I see it. It's like oiling your car or your bike or whatever that you have to keep moving. So I think there'll be a different form for me at some point. I'll probably have to find some other sports and it's probably easier to change it completely than try and throw a javelin and it goes 5 meters.
This might sound really extreme, but from looking at it from my perspective, where you can write, you can just keep writing for however long you want, because it's not necessarily that sort of physically, you don't have that physical toll. But to me, it seems almost frightening to imagine that there is a clock on how long you can do whatever you want to do, like in a sporting kind of way, because you can only do it for so long before your body starts to kind of not be able to do it anymore. So do you kind of feel like that?
I think
Or
all athletes do because it's against the clock.
mhm.
That's another pressure that you can't, other pressures you can kind of manage and, whether it's something a pressure from yourself, you can manage that. Whereas there's an external one there that's just almost looming over like a bit of a dark cloud.
Just not in your control.
Yeah, but everyone's in the same boat, I suppose. So it's just life, isn't it? So yeah, it's definitely not one that many enjoy. thinking about. I think you'll probably find a lot of athletes when people start, it's amazing when you think people will say, oh, you're 27, 28, they'll go, oh, you're getting on a bit. And you think, this really is very sports specific when you think about it, because
Yeah.
when you really think that's actually quite young, it's just in the sporting world, it's sometimes, especially imagine being in gymnastics. I mean, they're that young starting to do gymnastics that that age of 28 would be really old. So I guess it's just the perspective.
Definitely, yeah.
Chris, you've gone awfully quiet and just left it to Katie and I here. It's
It's
rather unnerving.
it's far more interesting, isn't it?
No.
Unless I'm thinking Katie's got the best career of all of us, isn't it? She can write to the day she dies.
And I feel like I should be putting out there to the listeners about how Chris is coming at this from somebody who's now got a poor battered and bruised wrist and rib from doing his exercise that you do every day. But do you do that for a mental thing?
Don't do it for a mental thing.
As in, some people do their exercise because it makes them feel good and energized for the day.
Well,
Mindfulness.
It does. I do. I like being fit, if that's what you're asking. So I run every day. And yes, I did fall over and break my hand. Yes. You also have, as you get older, you have to do it. I think it's a discipline, but also it's about having disciplines every day, isn't it? So it's making sure you have firm disciplines on how you, good or bad, lead your life. I think
it's holding yourself accountable as well, isn't it? So probably if you don't go running, you then go, oh, I've done it every day for the last how long? If I don't go today, just because, it's grey and raining outside, you're going to be frustrated at yourself later.
Well, it's also, life is cruel. So I like my food. So I found that somewhere along the line, sadly, I can't eat as much now. I have to eat a fraction of what I used to eat. And I still get bigger. It really annoys me.
Sorry.
As you know, I've had a kind of a doctor giving me partner who gave me a running commentary on weight, but actually I eat fraction and still. So I think just life has a wicked sense of humour that just. I always say when I get up there, I'm going to have a few words with St. Peter. There's a lot of black humour flying around, I think.
I feel like there is still some undertones of entrepreneurial spirit in this conversation, but we could have also gone slightly off-piste here. But it's good to talk about the wider aspect as well.
I think the key bit is about passions, isn't it? It's about passions and disciplines is what determines the person, I think.
They do say you find and do what you're passionate about, and you'll feel like you never have to work a day in your life. That's what they say, isn't it?
Do you believe in that, though? Do you believe that's like a true statement?
I feel like it's hard because I feel like you do anything enough, and to that level, it becomes a job. I always argue, like when you go into a kitchen anywhere, you've got someone who was passionate about food as a chef, started out with a pure passion for exploring the creative side of the food world. And then you go and put them in a kitchen to do the same menu every day, and the love goes slightly. And that's why you've probably got to put certain aspects of the passion back in where they can be creative, or, give them the ingredients and say, that's your dish, you can do it. Because otherwise it does get boring. It's they're doing something they loved and it's turned monotonous. So yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure actually. What do you think, Katie?
I feel yes and no. I think the fact that you're doing something that you love is great, but I kind of still do think of it as work because there is the discipline in it, and it is really hard, either, physically or mentally. So I do think it is work, but I think it's work worth doing and work that I don't think I could live without, if that makes sense.
Yes. Sounds like a toxic relationship.
Oh gosh, it does.
It does, doesn't it? What about you, Chris?
Oh, I think, in fairness, I think again it's a complicated answer. I think the lovely thing about having your own business is you can do what you enjoy, and I have to say I love what I do. I love what we strive to do, and I jump out of bed every morning, even on the bad days. So, and actually, I love developing people like yourselves. Well, to me, that's great fun. So, look, for me, on one side, I'll say I've had an incredibly fortunate and privileged life. On the other hand, I do see that people who have to work environments where they are having to work for someone else feel stress, feel always having to report to somebody is pretty unpleasant. When they don't have the vision or the enjoyment, or feel they're working, just for security or for their families, must be a very hard, stressful life. And I really, so I do think it can be. I mean, it is that old bit. You got to do what you enjoy. It's not always as easy as it sounds.
No.
Life is complicated. But I do think it's about how you find. I think whoever you are, you got to have your passions alongside. You can deal with the stress if you have your passions as
Yeah,
well.
definitely. I think that's a good
Mm.
point to finish on. As almost like you should find something you love doing and not stop doing it, whether it's for making money aspect or a passion. Everyone's got to have them, and it's healthy because
Yeah,
if you have
it is.
a hard day at work, you go and escape through whatever avenue it is, and it helps you rewind and decompress. When I go and throw a javelin at the ground aggressively out of anger, or you go and run and go to war with a pavement, Chris, or
Thank you, Izzy.
whatever it might be. Well, I think that's probably quite a detailed whistle-stop tour of entrepreneurial leadership, I think, isn't it? So thanks, Chris. Thank you, Kate.
Yes, thank you. Mhm.